the fundamental spirit that has imbued the West is the only spirit that has ever actually lifted people who are oppressed out of their oppression.
Yeah.
And so what that means is this,
I believe that too.
the radical critique that's been aimed at Western culture in the name of freedom for oppression is actually attacking the very spirit that has lifted people out of oppression to the degree that that's been the case.
I'm sure you're right.
Well, we could start with, so what are the bedrock assumptions of Western culture that make such things as free trade possible, assuming that that generates a sort of generous wealth, which seems to be the case. And one of them is that there's an idea, and the West hasn't been, what would you say, without sin in applying this idea, that every single person is a locus of implicit divine worth, regardless of their particularities. It's a very weird proposition, right? Because we differ so much in our obviously admirable attributes. Some of us are more intelligent, more attractive, more powerful, have more physical prowess, are more ethical, are more hardworking. Like there's endless dimensions on which you can rank order human beings. But there's this strange proposition that emerged essentially in the Middle East that despite all that surface variability and that hierarchical rank ordering, every single person, man and woman alike, regardless of race or creed or color, has to be treated as a locus of divine worth. And I don't think that you can even make a credible argument against slavery on moral grounds without accepting that as an axiomatic presumption. And so then I think, well, if that's the case, because look, if there's no intrinsic worth that's divine in some sense, so sacred, then why can't I just do with you what I want if I have the power? Like, why is that wrong exactly? Like, it might be inconvenient for you, and you are no doubt going to be motivated to rebel, maybe, if you don't want to succumb, but perhaps you'd be motivated to rebel. But I don't see how you can make a moral case that if I can do it, I shouldn't. If you're going to make the moral case, you have to make the assumption that each person, in some sense, is created in the image of what is sacred, and you can't violate that, regardless of apparent evidence for hierarchical difference. And so it's that spirit, as far as I can tell. We were talking about William Wilberforce just before the podcast started, and the British attempt to abolish slavery, which is the real miracle, right?
Yeah.
Not that they were ever involved in slavery, because that was true everywhere for all time.
Every empire, including black empires.
Right. Well, and it was part of the alternative hypothesis that something like might meant moral virtue, and might inspired moral virtue meant right. And that was the ethos that governed everyone, everywhere, until this strange idea emerged that regardless of appearance, somehow each person was characterized by intrinsic inviolable worth. And so then you see the radicals go after that in the name of the poor and oppressed. And I think, wait a minute, guys, like you're failing to understand something here, which is that the spirit that emerged to push back against slavery is the central spirit of the very system that you're trying to demolish. And so how in the world is that going to work out for the people you purport to stand for practically? I mean, it's definitely the case that the distribution of the biblical corpus throughout Europe, to begin with, was part and parcel of the process that indicated to the oppressed peasantry of Europe that there was something fundamentally wrong with serfdom, for example, that it was a violation of something like a divine order. And that all happened in large consequence because of the Gutenberg Bible and the distribution of the biblical corpus far and wide, which also helped people become literate and to also start to understand that no one had the right to oppress them. We can go into that issue of like inviolable individual worth, but I don't see how that idea can be challenged on historical grounds, because as far as I can tell, that's what happened. It's those ideas, strange ideas that led to the abolition of slavery. We could talk about Britain. You know a fair bit about Wilberforce. Why don't we talk a little bit about what he did? Because it's quite the bloody miracle.